Greetings. Welcome to this recording of the Future Trends Forum. And this session was a bit unusual in that the guest of honor, the one that we got to ask questions of, was in fact myself. Because this session was about the release of my new book, Peak Higher Ed, just published from Johns Hopkins University Press. So instead of me doing all the moderating and hosting, we had Wesson Radomski and Brent Anders taking care of that job. And I think you'll find that the questions that came and the comments that appeared were all quite brilliant. And it was really exciting for me as an author to have some early feedback on the book. Well, there'll be a link to the book's webpage in the show notes. And as always, please like and subscribe, and also leave comments. The comment box is open for all of you. I hope you enjoy. And we'll be starting. In fact, we should start now. Let me welcome everybody. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. I'm really glad to see everybody here today for personal reasons, which will become clear very shortly. I was going to say we normally have a fantastic guest, but today the guest is a surprise, an unusual guest. But before we get into that, I want to just introduce the program. Let me explain what this is, who we are, and how this works for the next hour of conversation. The key thing here is that the forum is all about conversation. Even today's session, which is about a book, is going to be entirely about questions and answers, people thinking out loud, people pushing back, disagreeing, agreeing, because we believe that through conversation, that's the best way that we can collaboratively, even collectively, grapple with the future of higher education. And I say we, there's a bunch of us. I should say, most importantly, behind me is Ash the cat, who is here just to supervise, as cats do. I'm Bryan Alexander. I'm the forum's creator and host. And with me is Wesson Radomski, who is...
Hi, y'all.
Hello, please.
Yeah, I can introduce myself this time. I've
Yes.
been working with Bryan here on the forum for a number of years, and I'm very excited today to be co-hosting, talking about Bryan's latest book alongside Brent Anders, who's a multiple time now forum guest, often attendee, who contributes wonderful things to the forum. So we're all excited to be here today.
Oh, I'm so glad. Brent, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, just like what Weston said, yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I definitely read through the book, so I'm very interested and excited about all these different topics. And yeah, being a friend of the show, I'm honored to be here. That's why I haven't shaved for a week to try and express the beard power that comes from your wisdom. So we look forward to all of that as well.
Well, I'm so glad. And as always, you both look excellent. And I'm really grateful and honored for the two of you to be here. Okay, then that's all introduction. Now I'd like to start off with this week's session. And the session's a little bit different because the guest, the person to be interrogated today is myself. And the reason is because Johns Hopkins University Press just published my new book, Peak Higher Education. I'm really, really excited about it. And rather than actually read it out loud to you, which would be insanely boring, rather than actually just giving you a slideshow from it, which would go against the very spirit of the Future Trends Forum, what I was hoping is that we could have some conversation about it. In order to prime the pump for that, I have given early copies of the book to several different folks, including, as you saw, Wesson and Brent, and they will be able to start off with asking questions based on their particular expertise and their interests. And a few of you else in the crowd will have your own questions if you've had a chance to take a look at the book. I'll put a link to the official website for the book there in the chat, and that gives you a link to the table of contents, some description of it, as well as links where you can purchase it on Amazon.com, on bookshop.org, and from the Johns Hopkins University Press site. Before we go even further, I just want to do this. I'll say this again. I just want to give a big shout out and a big warm hug of love to the people at Johns Hopkins University Press, from Greg Britton on down. The editors there, the copy editors, the staff who work on everything from publicity distribution have been just terrific. This book could not happen without them. They've done terrific, terrific work, and I adore them. So thank you for them. Um,
Thank you so
Already
much,
questions
Bryan.
have bubbled up, but please, Wesson and Brent, why don't you take off? Why don't you start us going?
Yeah, happy to. Big shoes to fill today, and really excited to hear you share directly here some of the really interesting insights in this latest book. So thank you. And thank you for giving us this opportunity here to play host. And I do love the
Pleasure.
questions already coming in the chat. Folks, feel free to keep entering them there or in the Q&A function, and we'll keep tabs on those. Also, feel free to give me a shout out if you are having any tech issues, having trouble hearing any of us. We'll keep an eye on that and keep things flowing. So thank you. And Bryan, my first question is your traditional first question, I suppose slightly revised, but as a futurist, you're already looking forward. You're always looking towards the next thing. And in order to get a book published, there's a bit of a delay between when you let go of your baby and when you start talking about it again in the world. So I'm curious, as we look to a new calendar year, what are you looking at in 2026? What trends that you explored in here are you starting to follow more closely now that we're moving into a new year?
Great question. Great question. And there, some of the trends are pretty durable and pretty reliable. If anyone listening or watching this knows, some of them that I followed for more than a decade include the continued demographic transition. So that's the way that humans are living longer in the developed world and how we're having fewer children and the impacts of that on higher education, but also on society as a whole. That's simply baked in. I've been forecasting that there would be some cultural back and forth about that. And that's been appearing with, say, the neonatalist movement, but it's simply occurring right now, and it doesn't look likely to change for the next 20 years or so. And that's one. Another is the enormous pressure of politics. And to an extent, I underestimated some of that. I was expecting the Republican Party to really squeeze higher education in a lot of ways, based in part on Project 2025, as well as the actions of individual state Republican parties and the first term of the Trump administration. And so that's obviously happening across the board. But I was not expecting some of the developments, such as the basic shakedowns of some universities, threatening them until they cough up money. I didn't anticipate that. So that's one of the things I'll be tracking, as well as to see what kind of responses there are. Will Americans as a whole, will our culture turn to support higher education again if this spectacle looks so awful in so many ways? But also, will the Democratic Party be able to stand up and fight for higher education? And again, when I'm saying that these are very large terms, it's going to depend so much on individual states as well as individual counties and cities. Uh, I guess, I think durable isn't the right word, but another major force that I was tracking was AI and its impact on higher education. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in a bit. And that's the subject of a chapter, and then it appears throughout the book. But so far, everything I've been tracking is continuing to play out. So we have all kinds of questions. Will AI become a bubble that bursts? How are the many impacts of this on the labor market, for example, and on politics? How will this change higher education? And I have a whole bunch of models for that, which we'll talk about. Uh, Another thing that I think is I guess especially sad for me is how higher education's reputation has been dwindling. So I've been tracking this since um, the early 2010s, but just to see how poll after poll, survey after survey shows overall a declining value that Americans hold in higher ed. I mean, it depends on the pollster, it depends on the question, but generally speaking, that souring has been occurring, and that has a lot of impacts on individual decisions to attend higher education, state, federal, and local decisions to fund higher education, as well as philanthropic moves about this. But that is something that I've been tracking steadily, and of course, climate change. But that's the subject of my previous book. I'm happy to say more, Wesson. And in fact, I could take the next hour, but I hope this gives a start of an answer.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. And that does give us a great overview of topics that we can keep digging into over the course of the hour. So, folks, we already have questions coming in, so keep those coming. We'll manage those. We're going to kick it off with a couple more questions from us. Brent, if you want to
Yeah,
take the lead with the
definitely.
next one.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, great intro, Wesson, because that really helps lay the foundation here. Because a lot of the things that you're continuing to work on are mentioned within this book on some level. So, this is definitely a great intro. I want you to know that I am trying to become more and more of an environmentalist myself, and I never print anything now, basically,
Mm.
for my classes. But for a special occasion like this, I did print my questions to ask you to make sure that I have everything very ready here. So my very first question here deals with this aspect of the different reasons of why there are these issues with higher education. And one of the sections that I found that was really interesting was that whole thing dealing with the problem of elite overproduction. So by this, I'm talking about the production of too many PhDs. So can you please tell us more about how this might in turn elicit backlash, which could build on the increasingly negative reputation of higher education? So again, you started to mention that, but can you please give us more on this specific aspect of overproduction of PhDs?
Well, thank you. It's a great question, and I'm very glad to see you making a turn to the green, by the way. The in a small sense, this is a term that we're used to in higher ed that's a bit controversial. In the smaller sense, is that we've witnessed the professoriate becoming more and more adjunctified over the past 30 years. That is, the proportion of faculty who are adjuncts, that is, in Canada, they're called sessionals, people who are hired and fired at will, has been growing and growing until now it's the largest percentage of the population of American professors. The One of the reasons for this is that the Research One universities that produce the lion's share of the PhDs who go on to become faculty have been producing more and more. That has been enrolling more and more graduate students and producing more and more PhDs until it's clear they produce far too many for the actual market to be able to handle, which is one reason why we have the offshoot of alternative academic or alt-ac careers. And so that's in a small sense, that's an idea that we've been wrestling with. But in the broader sense, the historian Peter Turchin coined the term elite overproduction to refer to a moment in any society in history, and he goes back to ancient Rome and 18th century France, is when the elite of the society, it depends on the society, but yeah, obviously the wealthiest, the aristocrats, royal families, but also sometimes merchants, depends again on the society. When there are so many of them produced that they do not have adequate career opportunities, then chaos starts to break forth. Again, I'm not saying this because I think Turchin has discovered a fundamental law of nature. I mean, I'm not saying this is 100% guaranteed to happen, but it seems that this is starting to occur in the United States, in part because we have produced so many graduates, more than ever in our history before. I mean, part of the backstory of peak higher education is a century plus of expanding access to higher education, where more and more people, not just Americans, but other citizens of other nations of the world, have graduated from American higher education. And this has been a great tidal wave of growth, which went on until about 2012. At that point, the wave stopped and started to recede. And for the next decade, it has receded year by year, population by population. And hence my term, peak higher ed. But we still have all these graduates who have, among other things, a lack of professions to follow. There aren't as many slots in government, in technology, large corporations, in nonprofits, et cetera. And so we're starting to see this occur in the data, in the economic data, where we're finding more and more unemployment among people who have degrees. I mean, not just people who had some experience, but actually do have degrees. Uh, Turchin's idea is that this is going to lead to all kinds of cultural problems and stresses as people war with each other for positions within the elites. I think for the United States, we have a particular problem, which is that not only do we have pretty rampant economic inequality, but we also have the sense of maybe we've overproduced higher education. That is, maybe we've produced so many graduates that we can't handle that. Maybe we have so much higher education capacity that it overshoots the actual demand for it, which may be why we've been having so many program cuts, people being laid off, institutions, closing or merging. Uh, it's possible down the road that if we continue to have this overshoot, that we will continue to have more and more problems as people in the elite strive with each other for limited positions, but also as we struggle to try to recalibrate higher education for the reality of this part of the century. I hope that answers. I'm sorry to go on in such.
Definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. It's an interesting topic. So yeah, I appreciate that answer.
I recommend Turchin. He's always a very, very interesting writer to see. In the chat, Greg Britton, who you already heard me sing a paean to him before, mentions this is why he can't find a plumber. that may be tongue in cheek or it may be straight, but it is completely true. I mean, in the US, we have this problem where in the professions usually called the skilled trades, you think about HVAC, electricians, plumbing, woodworking, where the median age of people in those fields has been going up and up as fewer and fewer younger people go into those fields. And so we're starting to see that. Karen Costa mentions in Massachusetts, where she lives, there are now massive waiting lists to get into vocational technology schools. So that may be one of the calibrations we're seeing. And just not to come back to the political nature too much, one interesting thing that we find is that Republicans are actually very pro VOTEC. They're very pro professional education.
Yeah, and that's something that I thought about a lot while reading your book, actually, was some of the pivots that we've seen higher education institutions make historically, like teacher colleges pivoting in their mission to train entirely different parts of the workforce
Mhm.
and radically expand their vision.
Yes.
What are we training folks for in higher ed now that might have to totally pivot if we want to continue to exist
Oh,
as successful institutions and maintain enrollment? So I'm really interested to hear a little bit more of the speculative components of your book as we talk today. Something that keeps coming up in the chat already, of course, is AI. And so I'm wondering if we want to start opening that topic
Yeah.
now and see
Let's
if,
mm,
do
Brent,
that.
you want to
Yes.
run
I'm
with
very
that for a little
primed
bit
to
and
ask.
bring in some of
Yeah.
these questions that are coming up in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Weston. So, okay, so here's my question for this because I really enjoyed this part of the book. It was my favorite part of the book, of course. So the question is, uh, so it deals with AI and how this interacts with higher education. I really appreciate how you talk about the different scenarios of grow, collapse, discipline, and transform. So one of my favorite lines is, as the world becomes stranger under AI's impact, academics might emerge as more trusted and stable guides to a transforming society. So could you please explain this a bit more and show how higher education could become leaders in this area and thereby improve its overall reputation and relevancy, actually, because I think that's a major aspect of this as well.
I'm so glad to hear it. I mean, and if this chapter passed with your approval, if it passed muster, then that's the acid test. Friends, if you don't know Brent Enders, he is, from me, the world's best authority on AI literacy. Uh, and I think it's a question of two different fields of perception. One field is how we view AI. I don't mean how good AI is, how big the parameters are. I mean just what we think of it. So this is partly cultural, partly emotional, partly psychological. And the other is the field of how we think about higher education. And it's possible, again, that's independent of how many PhDs we graduate, how many campuses we have. And so we're talking about two big, very amorphous fields. And I think it's possible that we will, as a society, view AI to be something disturbing, unsettling, challenging, maybe exciting as well, but also just very, very pressing on us that we need help with. And at the same time, we might come to view academia as a good, reliable source for thinking about that. So when I'm asking about AI literacy, I mention Brent, who is an academic. If I'm thinking about, for example, how well Perplexity produces code, I might turn to a computer scientist to say, all right, well, you're a professional on this. What do you think of the results? If I'm thinking about, if I'm wondering about what kind of impact will AI have on the labor market? That is, are we going to see the creation of new jobs based on AI? Or are we going to see a reduction of jobs total? Where does that go? Then I think turning to an economics professor, especially a macroeconomics professor, would be really, really useful. So if those two cultural gestalts, if you will, settle down so that we're anxious about AI and we trust higher education, then that might be for the best for higher education. It might mean that our reputation grows as a result. More people take us seriously, not just as public intellectuals, which is important, but also, if I'm an 18-year-old and I don't know what's going to happen to the world as a result of AI, do I want to go to a college where I would study? Will that college prepare me adequately for the post-AI future? If we hold that view, then yes, then this is good for enrollment. Uh, I hope that that constellation of cultural attitudes comes together. That's one of the positive ways I have of thinking about this.
Yeah, I think that's a real powerful way. And the big part about this book, as far as that aspect of AI, because everyone is very interested in that, is that you lay down those different scenarios as well as combine some of them as to what could happen. And of course, most likely, it's going to be a combination of different aspects of that.
Yes.
So it's going to be. I think this is it's great that you put this in the book because I see lots of academics and administrators reading this book and then starting to understand, oh yeah, this is super important. This is something that we have to be ahead of, as opposed to, oh, let's just wait it out type of thing, which definitely won't be beneficial to anyone. So yeah, I really appreciate that part of the book.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I raised in the book, I raised three huge challenges or three problems, if you will, for higher education, but they're also big forces in the world. One of them is AI, one of them is climate change, and one of them is changing attitudes towards progress. And my sense is that academics have so much to offer on all three of those fields that we should be pouncing right away. And on all registers, changing how our campuses physically operate, what we teach and how we teach, the research we do, how we work in terms of town-gown relations, how we reach out to the world as a whole, as public intellectuals and just as activists. I mean, I think this is a great time to do that, which is not easy. In the chat,
Mhm.
which I'm trying to focus on a bit, there's some anxieties about how these play out politically. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's important. Well, Wesson and Brent, I'm holding back on being a host so much.
I
But I'd love to hear your questions, but also if you want to surface any questions that have come up so far, either in the chat or in the Q&A box.
Sure thing. I'd like to share another AI related question that came in from Ben Harwood. He asks if AI reduces the need for knowledge workers and PhDs, what is the ethical obligation of higher education to protect jobs or to redesign itself around human judgment and agency?
What a fantastic question. I mean, and in many ways, answering that could be a book. And shout out to Ben, who's at Skidmore College in New York State. What a fantastic question. I appreciate that you phrase this as conditional. If AI reduces the need for knowledge workers and PhDs, and that's a big if. I mean, part of the problem of thinking about this now is that there are so many conditionals, so many possibilities that rely on each other that could unfold in different ways. But one obligation we could think about for higher education, what we can do as institutions or what we should do, one of them is to try to fight for the human in the loop idea. I actually have this as a slogan on my phone, keeping humans in the loop. I mean, it's one destination for AI is to have it automate processes that AI is good at handling, crunching lots of data, doing repetitive tasks, and so on. But it's also possible for it to really take over a lot of processes and de-skill or de-involve humans in the loop. So, I mean, you could think of cartoonish or nightmarish scenarios, such as people in a dating app who each use an AI to produce pictures and content and chatter for themselves to each other. And it's basically the two AIs having a romance, and the two people are kind of left out. We could think a bad case of instructor or campus, which is using AI to generate the syllabus, to generate curriculum, to generate materials, and the students use AI to generate all their responses. And again, humans drop out. We could think in politics or war or in national security, automating all kinds of operations of policing and reducing the role of humans. And there are a lot of reasons to do that, to save time, to save money, to physically protect humans at times. But then we lose that human agency. We lose that human touch. One argument right now is that higher education should double down on what humans do best. And Joseph Owen, university president, has a fascinating book called Robot Proof, which came out almost 10 years ago, where he argues that that's how we should rethink university curricula is what do humans do better than AI? And when he wrote the book, before ChatGPT 3 came out, he said, well, one thing is humans are better at creativity. Arguably, that's arguably that's not necessarily so clear right now. But thinking about ways of interacting with humans in ways that are supportive and sensitive, AI can mimic that right now, but not at scale. Ways of organizing people, ways of shaping culture. Perhaps these are the areas where higher education should really focus. Um, Ben, I think you could go still further with that, but I want to hold off. Am I answering more or less what you're talking about?
Thank you so much, Brian. It looks like
So
that's
I want to continue
Mhm.
on with that because this kind of ties in my third question, because it deals with the AI aspects here, and that's in talking about hyper modernism. You had a section here where you talked about modernism versus modernity, right? Where you describe how the peak higher education scenario may fit into both sides of this debate. Could you explain those concepts and then talk about how we could have both of those things going on?
Sure. This is this is a topic which has been occupying my brain for quite some time, and I think this is going to be the subject of either my next book or the book after that. In chapter six, I raise the idea that we seem to be seeing two very, very different ways of thinking about progress surface and grow in our culture right now. One of them, which I've nicknamed hypermodern, argues that we need to keep going on progress. That is, we need to keep developing new technologies. We need to keep expanding into space. We have to give expanding our knowledge base. We need to keep expanding the human lifespan as well as our health span. That, this the past 2 centuries of extraordinary, literally historically extraordinary growth. We need to just keep going on. Hit the pedal, put the floor, pedal to the floor and go, go, go. And an end product of that might be something like Star Trek, or if you will, the TV series and novels The Expanse. Opposed to that is what my good friend and often participant on this program, Ed Webb, is nicknamed the demodernists, who say, no, no, stop, 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 stop. All this progress that we've done, this enormous, elaborate edifice of modernity that we inhabit, has terrible problems. We've erected this civilization at terrible costs of colonialism, of sexism, of epic violence, of dehumanization, and so on. Climate change is the result of all of this. And what we need to do now is stop, pause where our civilization is, and redress all those problems. There's a wonderful book by Bill McKibben just called Falter, where he makes the case that, well, we're in a tremendous state right now in terms of the capacities of humanity. We live longer than ever before. We have access to more knowledge than ever before, all these positive things. Why don't we just pause for right now and take a few years, maybe a generation, to fix all the problems, to solve climate change, to repair environmental damages, to undo the ravages of colonialism, and so on. And the demoderns kind of split into two, and I'm generalizing immensely here. But one side says we need to pause and do this now because it's ethically the right thing to do. That's just the best thing to do, given the knowledge we have and the opportunities we have. The other side of the demodernist says it's too late to make a decision. This is already happening. Modernity as we know it is starting to crack and fall apart. And what we can do right now, the best thing we can do is manage a glide path down. So these two schools of thought are so different and so removed on so many different levels. And I think we're starting to see signs of them appear in different places. We have different European activists, for example, are calling for a pause of economic growth or degrowth, shrinking the society. I mentioned demographics earlier. That's part of it, is the question of, do we keep growing our population as a whole, or do we shrink the population? Think about space exploration. We have people like Elon Musk, NASA, the Chinese space program, want to go further and further into the moon, to the asteroids, to Mars, and so on. And then we have people like the great science fiction writer and ecologist Kim Stanley Robinson, who say we actually need to withdraw our space facilities and focus just on healing the Earth right now. I think this great clash of ideologies is going to keep unfolding and developing through multiple areas, from public policy to pop culture, and definitely through higher education as we go. And education, first of all, as I said a few minutes ago, we can respond to this. We can analyze this emerging pair of ideologies. We can teach this, but also we have to think what it means for us. should higher education continue to grow, grow, grow like the hypermodernists? Or should we perhaps decide to shrink, if we are overbuilt, but also if we've gone too far and now is the time to reduce? So that's what that chapter tries to explore. And I think this topic really plays out in many, many ways.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of a cerebral type of concept because generally in education and academia, we think about, oh yeah, constant growth. We have to more knowledge, more capability, but at what costs and what are we giving up and what are we losing to attain all that? So I think it's really important. And I'm glad you included it in this book as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it looks like we have a question from Tom Hames. Would you like to unmute yourself and
Yep.
ask Bryan a question?
Sure, Bryan. I put this in the chat, but I promised you a difficult question, so I'm going to throw it at you now. So I am increasingly coming to the conclusion that AI is a systemic threat to higher education. And when I say that, I mean the institutions by which we measure education, the institutions by which we transfer knowledge, all of those things are what is threatened by AI. And all the things that people talk about, like writing syllabi or writing tests or answering tests or cheating or whatever, those are systemic issues. They have nothing to do with learning. The things that have to do with learning are very different. And I find it a little ironic at this point that we need that kind of learning much more than we've ever needed it, because in order to be able to, I don't like to use the word race with AI or that somehow we're in competition with AI, but in order to exploit its abilities to the maximum, we need good thinkers, and we're not producing them. There's ample data that shows that, and that the systems do not contribute to that end. So, and I think people are not willing to step back enough and say, hey, you know what? The reason this isn't working is because we have 16-week semesters, because we have grades, because we have, you can't cheat if you don't have grades, right? I mean, at some level, that's a number one driver of cheating is grades, right? So, I mean, all of those things come to play, and I'm kind of curious, and I have to admit I haven't read the book yet, but I'm kind of curious how you see that fundamental dichotomy, that fundamental challenge, and whether you cover that in the book.
I do, and maybe not to your satisfaction, but I do, and I have to say, Tom, first of all, I'm really glad to see you here. In all seriousness, because you must be jet lagged beyond belief. Tom has been in Central Europe for a week or two, so he's probably his body is probably somewhere, somewhere in Texas, but his mind is being reeled in over the Atlantic.
It's early evening there, so whatever. I'm not going to hit the wall until 4 o'clock, so I'm good until then.
We should get you some good pastry then, just to keep going. But also, I appreciate that I mean, knowing you as a friend, but also, hearing your comments on this forum over the past decade, that these are ideas you've been wrestling with, and also that you've been writing about in a series of books, to which I commend everybody. I think the first part of your question is, I think it's as an exercise, we can see many, many ways by which we can automate different operations in higher education. Let me just for a moment step back from valuing them, thinking about automating grading, automating enrollment, thinking about curricular design, thinking about lesson production. I mean, forgetting whether or not this is good or evil or human-centric or humans in the loop or not, we can do all of these things to different degrees of quality. And it seems likely that we'll get better at this as the technology incrementally improves. So we have that challenge up there, or that opportunity, depending on how you put it. We can also see this as a response, again, going back to attitudes again. If people view higher education as, among other things, too expensive, and friends, I don't know if you've been tracking this or if I've mentioned this in the program, we already had two Boston area, one college, one university crack the $100,000 per year barrier for cost of attendance. When people see that and they look at higher education and view higher education as too expensive and perhaps not relevant, perhaps out of date, perhaps institutionally lowercase c conservative, then there may be a push to automate us more and more. And it may be the classic, Harold Christensen sense of disruption, where people say, okay, well, I could go to take a class from the great Tom Hames, who will teach me about government in a really exciting, interactive way, which is all true. Tom is a terrific teacher. Or I could save money and use my tutor bot, which is going to be available 24/7, which is going to be a lot more patient than any human being, even Tom Hames, that can handle multiple questions. And it cost me a tenth the price. Maybe that should be. I mean, so that's one challenge to us right now. And again, since the majority of American campuses depend on tuition and student fees to keep the doors open, the more students we lose, the harder it becomes to keep those doors open. Um, I think I agree completely that we need to be teaching thinking and problem solving and creativity more and more and better and better. And this is hard for us. In the chat, Lisa Durf mentions that this needs to start back in fourth grade, and I agree. But one problem we have is that public K through 12, and to a large extent private K through 12, is massively bound up with a huge testing regime, which flies right in the face of that kind of question. To give a student a prompt like, how would you redesign your hometown if artificial general intelligence appears? It'd be a fantastic prompt for them to explore and to cut across all kinds of intellectual domains, from computer science to history to sociology, politics, economics. I mean, it'd be a lot of fun, right? But that doesn't fit on the NEEP exam. And it's hard to plug that in. And then in higher education as a whole, I think so many of us in academia are under threat. We feel ourselves to be challenged by institutional fragility, by politics, by threats beyond politics, by changing cultural attitudes, and so on. That it's very hard for us to say, all right, well, in the face of that threat, let's reinvent everything we do. The more human reaction is to become a turtle, right? And to try and protect ourselves and to keep doing what we're doing. But to lean into all the pedagogies we know, active learning, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, to use technologies that support them, like e-portfolios and simulations and so on. I think we can do that, and that's really our challenge. There's a Tom, you've probably heard this line before, and some of you have heard this as well. And I'm going to blank on the name of the Brit who said it, but he said, "We are out of money. Now we need to start thinking." And that may be really where we are.
And how do you see us worming our way out of that?
We
Sorry.
had we had Larrabee on here, who had his book on higher education entitled "A Perfect Mess," and I'm always struck by that as a description of it. I mean, U.S. higher education is unusually disorganized. I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that we don't have a national university, unlike a lot of countries. We don't really have decades of national leadership, federal higher education policy. The Department of Education is younger than I am, for example. We are very decentralized, and that can be a problem in some ways, but it's also a wonderful glory for us because it means that we have so much institutional diversity. Everything from Research One universities to Catholic and Methodist universities to Jewish academies to military schools, and we have this huge diversity, which means we have all these opportunities to think and try that out, Tom. So I think we should see problems unfold trying to do this, but also all kinds of experiments, all kinds of creativity.
Brian, in your book, you also mentioned the Bringing the Theory to Practice Paradigm Project, which I think is a key aspect of one of the solutions that you offer as far as how to address this. And that ties directly into the question there. And this is exactly what Jose Bowen has been talking about, what I've been pushing for as well, where we need to shift higher education to be much, much more experiential, right? So that we can maximize things like the social learning aspect, oh yeah, I went through an internship. Oh yeah, we did role play. Now I am maximizing all those real implementations so that when I leave higher education, it's not just theory, but also I have hands-on practice. I know how to be a manager already, not just an entry-level person, but look, I've gained this real experience by going through higher education. Can you tell us more about that project?
The Bringing Theory to Practice project is one that I've been honored to be part of for a few years. And in fact, we had a couple of sessions with its founder and director, David Scobie, and we've had several different people who participated in that. But the idea, without going too far into the weeds, the idea was to try to have a movement to reform higher education in a way that would, among other things, improve how we care for students, how we support students. You could think, if I can generalize at a ridiculous level, that maybe for a couple of generations we had a quantitative approach to American higher education. The goal was to get as many students through colleges and universities as possible. And that's how we measured it. Those are the metrics. And you can go through President Obama's First State of the Union address, where he calls for, I believe, up to 60% of Americans to have college experience. I mean, this quantitative throughput was, a major force. I think instead we can shift from a quantitative to a qualitative approach, where we try to improve the standard of care for our students, to improve their experience, and to give on multiple axes. So thinking of their mental health, which is a crying need, as we've had several sessions describing, to improve their ability to have a successful academic experience, to to have good classes and to graduate. Again, a lot of students don't graduate. And they have debt, which is a terrible outcome. To think about ways of supporting students when they want to become political activists. I think Karen Costa mentioned this in the chat, to support them in their family relationships, as a lot of students are caregivers, either of people younger or older than them. To think about students who have food insecurity. We've hosted several sessions with people who specialize in that. To really shift that quantitative to a qualitative approach. That's how I think of it. I think that's one way for higher education to succeed moving forward. And if you ask students about this, they'll say, "That sounds great. Why haven't we done this thousands of years ago?" It's expensive, is one reason. And it also requires us to rejigger and rethink a lot of our systems and structures, a lot of our assumptions. The institutions that pride themselves on excluding students, the instructors who pride themselves on flunking students. We have to rethink this in a lot of ways. So that's my final call in the book is for us to just improve that standard of care. In the chat, Mathieu Plourde says Maslow before Bloom, like during the pandemic. Mathieu, I hate to say this, because nobody wants to talk about the pandemic. But I think we learned so many things during that terrible time that we've looked away from, that we have to relearn. I mean, one of them was how we responded to an emergency with great alacrity. I mean, we pivoted campuses, threw everybody online in weeks or days without any extra support, which is a tremendous achievement that we need to be proud of, even if we made mistakes. I mean, it was something literally unprecedented that we did, which is tremendous. We formed data gathering, we formed intelligence gathering operations at campuses, we formed emergency committees, we published our data to the web, we did all this stuff. I think that showed us that we have that ability to pivot, to respond to a crisis, and we have that capacity in us. But the other thing is, Mathieu, and this is, I think, more of where your comment is coming from, we had that standard of care where we were redesigning our calendars, our physical classrooms, so that students wouldn't die, so they wouldn't be injured, so they wouldn't carry a terrible disease around with them. We have that within us as a service sector, if you will, in economic terms, as a caring institution in ethical terms, and we can do that again.
Thank you so much, Bryan. There are increasing questions, I guess, in the chat and in the Q&A about inequality too. Gina asks, do we face growing higher education attainment inequality so that in-person campus-based learning with all of the benefits of mentorship, networks, individualized human teaching and learning is the domain of the 1%, and it's online AI, certificates, etc. for everyone else? And I see that kind of also the divide that we might see if we increase that standard of care. The cost to provide that standard of care then could rule out large sections of the population. And in your book, you talk a good bit about going from college for all to college for some. And I'm wondering if that may be sort of part of what that trajectory could look like if we see that increasing split. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit on that front.
Well, if I could work backwards through this, the idea of college for all, this is still controversial. And now that it's fallen apart, people are denying that it ever happened. But the idea was to have as many people get as much post-secondary experience as possible. I mean, even taking a couple of classes at a community college through getting a PhD at a university. The idea being that for the public, this is just better for everybody, that it leads to more economic growth, it leads to more political and civic engagement. It leads to healthier outcomes in terms of mental and physical health. That's just it builds overall intelligence and knowledge. It's just a win-win. And then for private purposes, for individuals, it's better for you. Generally speaking, goes the bet that if more secondary, post-secondary experience you have, the more likely you are to get a job that pays more during the course of your life. I mean, this is the argument, and it's been a pretty bipartisan argument until about 2012. And when we maxed out on this, this idea of college for everyone has started to shake. It started to fall apart. I was really moved this year, and I quote this in the book. There was a New York Times editorial from a major educator who said we need to stop pushing K through 12 students into academia, that we need to resume preparing them for the skilled trades, that we overproduce them for college and universities. And the author of that was Randy Weingartner, the head of the American Federation of Teachers. Not some kind of right-wing troglodyte. I mean, she was someone who was really caring about K through 12 students and wanted to reform that. So it's possible that no one has come out and said, we now only should support college for a few people. Actually, I take that back. I have heard this from some people, including from some government officials. But we haven't made that cultural shift yet to say, instead of high school advisors and guidance counselors pushing you to college saying, maybe not, maybe you shouldn't do that. Um, I To go back to Gina Hausneck's question, and Gina and I went to graduate school together, so it's extremely sweet to see you here, Gina. Thank you for coming. I think the divide you're talking about is quite doable. I don't mean that in a good way at all. We've seen traces of this where you get some families in Silicon Valley that will try to reduce access to technology for their kids, that will push their kids into schools that have low technology footprints. They'll do Montessori without much technology. And instead, if to the extent that different educational technology and educational content can be cheaper, we can push that out to school districts that are not so well resourced. Friends, if you're not from the US or if you haven't looked into this, I mentioned before that American higher education is very decentralized. American K through 12 education is even more so. It's usually funded very, very locally, which is why in a given county or a given city, you can see wildly divergent budgets for different schools just based on that local tax support. Vermont was one of the few states that actually managed to break with that habit and try to have something like state funding across the state. In this case, we can expect to see more and more students from working classes, students who are poor or lower middle class, getting AI tutors because they're simply cheaper to offer. And that's a very powerful argument to make, especially in places that are financially strapped. And then we could see the wealthy having more humans paid to them. So we think about the per student budget for, say, the Ivy Leagues or for elite liberal arts institutions. That's way higher than what we have from an open enrollment state institution or a community college. So, Gina, we could see that continue unless we rethink higher ed for this greater standard of care. And it may be that the endowment tax that we just saw is starting to have some impact of shaving off from the top of that. But I think we really, really need to rethink that care, especially in terms of equity. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
I want to follow up and bring in a comment from Steve Ehrman in the chat, noting that some of this tracking and the split can break down potentially along racial lines in this scenario, and a concern about racial equity in a split,
Absolutely.
sort of forcing or pushing people off of the college trajectory.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the historical pattern in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender to a degree. I mean, we're taking a look at a lot of these fields. When we're talking about the skilled trades, we're talking about fields that are overwhelmingly staffed with men. Our we could see this playing out in other ways as well. We have biases by religion, biases by geography. Think about gaps between city and rural school districts, as well as colleges and universities. Yeah, we have to be extremely careful about this. I mean, that's been a focus of the forum for at least 6 years. We've been thinking about social justice and ways of balancing that. So yeah, we'd have to be if we did that. But I think again, that standard of care for everyone, if we go into that with a sense of equity and balance, then I think that will help us think about trying to avoid those kind of skews.
I have one more thing to bring in here from Paul Bond, which is a question about where community colleges fit in peak higher ed, which I think may also bring in some of these questions as well.
Excellent. Is that the question, or
yes, where do community colleges fit in peak higher ed?
Well, it's very interesting because from about roughly 2008 to about 2016, we saw community college enrollment plummet. And this is especially dire. And so again, friends, if we haven't thought about this together, community colleges tend to educate more students than about any other sector of American higher education. And they do so with fewer resources and with very, very little public support or public attention. There's also a great deal of snobbery aimed at community colleges, both within academia as well as outside of academia. I mean, for me, community colleges are heroes. They're doing tremendous, tremendous work on shoestrings. And I'm happy to praise them more and more. I recommend that people take a look at, say, the work of Matt Reed, for example, who is a community college dean, who writes very movingly about this. Um, Now, from about 2015, 2016, that enrollment decline turned around. And keep in mind that the decline was especially shocking in 2008 when we had the Great Recession, because usually when the economy has a downturn of any kind, you get a flood of people towards community colleges and open enrollment universities to reskill for for a challenging jobs market. That didn't happen in 2008, which was really shocking. But what happened instead was community colleges figured out how to return enrollment, and that was by teaching primarily high school juniors and seniors. The dual enrollment revolution is so huge. And again, it's because the marginal way that so many people think of community colleges that it hasn't gotten more press and more attention. But basically, community colleges are open to anybody of any age, but specifically through dual enrollment, targeting students who are currently enrolled in high schools, especially seniors and juniors. It's a terrific thing to do. It's a way to increase the curriculum that's available to those students. It's a great way for intergenerational learning in community colleges, and it brings in more and more enrollment. And that's been a tremendous development. Now, community colleges often compete with for-profit education, which gets almost no discussion in the higher ed, although I do recommend Tressing McMillan Cottom's great book, Lower Ed, about this. And so that competition between community colleges and for-profits keeps going. It may be that over the next 3 years, as we see a presidential administration that's very pro for-profit, that we may see more of that competition play out, and we may see for-profits, nab more students from community colleges. But I think we've also seen Mackenzie Scott, the philanthropist, donate very carefully and very lavishly to community colleges, including most recently to a community college in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I mean, it hopefully, we collectively realize the value of community colleges and support them better. I hope we do. I just fear that their marginal nature will often, be a problem for that. Happy to say more about that. I'm so glad you mentioned community colleges.
Bryan, when you're talking about some of these different aspects, as far as solutions to help address peak education, higher education, one of the things you also talked about was the open loop aspect. Um, Stanford University, where
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
continuing to sort of reach out to the people that graduate in order to help ensure that they continue on with lifelong learning. My question to you dealt with micro certification and micro courses and helping helping people to be able to continue to address the requirements of our world where that's constantly changing, right? Where, hey, AI can do this, so now you need to be able to do this, and being able to easily go back to higher education. And even in the chat, we're talking a lot about online instruction as well. So it kind of
Hmm.
ties in. What are your thoughts on those aspects in order to help sort of bring people back to help have better peak higher education as well.
Well, it's important to remember that online education has been growing, and in some cases, we see it being growing beyond what bricks and mortar education are doing in terms of student, total number of students and number of degrees offered and number of programs. Um, and that's a very interesting development in part because online education doesn't have a great reputation in the public and is often disdained within academia. But it is obviously growing, and we know how to teach well online. We've got, a generation plus of research on how to do that. I think, yeah, Mathieu says if the hour is already up, we're just almost at the very end of this. I think in many ways, if we want to treat this seriously, we have to treat lifelong learning as actually a serious thing. And all
Mm.
too often, what lifelong learning means is we hope a student graduates and donates lavishly as an alumnus. But instead, we're still based on the idea that you graduate at 22, you get a degree, which gives you a job, and you're in the profession, that career for life. But we know that's barely true at all anymore. We know that the labor economy is actually one of people having multiple jobs, multiple careers, sometimes simultaneously. We know that's increasingly the norm, and that we have to prepare students to be able to live and succeed in that world, which is where liberal education comes in. Study after study has shown that a liberal arts degree gives you the better mental ability to be able to jump between careers in life. Uh, that's an old argument. It's a really reliable one. But at the same time, we have to think, all right, I get a degree in, say, nursing, and I become a nurse, and I work as a nurse through my 20s. But in my 30s, I have a real change of heart. I'm fascinated by medical technology, and I want to learn photography. So I look at Tom Hames's great photos. I look at Ruben Puentedura's work and think, man, I could do that kind of work. Well, how do I become a photographer? Maybe I'll go online and take classes from some site. I'll just Google around and find that. Maybe I'll go down the street to the local community college. This is where my undergrad institution should be right there front and center to say, hey, Bryan, we have photography, all kinds of great stuff for you. Come on in. And it might be that 30 years later, I'm thinking about retiring. And what I really, really want to do is I really want to learn the Chinese language and Chinese culture. My alma mater should still be there, ready to say, come on, Bryan, we can help you, that we have that capacity. Few institutions are actually set up to do this seriously. We have a kind of fire and forget approach when it comes to students. But think about how important that connection would be, how strong that would be. Yeah, I'd be much more likely to donate, but also think about how much closer I'd be to the institution in terms of feedback and support, how much more available I'd be as a mentor to students, and what kind of great feedback they would get from me as they try and shape their curriculum. I think that learning episode idea is increasingly what we're doing. Colleges and universities just have to be able to account for that.
Thank you so much, Bryan. It looks like we are at the end of the hour. It has been so wonderful to co-host this with you, Brent, and to host you, Bryan, for a session on your latest book. It's wonderful to see you continuing this series. Greg is holding up a copy of the book, and I'm about to drop a link in the chat to find a copy for yourself. I really enjoyed reading this. I highly recommend that all of you take a look. It is classic Bryan Alexander. And I highly recommend you all read it. We will not have forum the next 2 weeks unless I am incorrect, Bryan. And
Sure.
so you can take a look at the forum website for information on our next upcoming sessions. A few of our upcoming guests were here today asking great questions and contributing. So stay tuned. We'll be more of the same in 2026. Bryan and Brent, any last words?
Yeah, I just want to say also to echo what you just said, I greatly appreciate Bryan you taking the time to talk about your book because it is really good information, very useful for higher academia, for any teacher, professor, as well as administrators. I think this is really good required reading to help them understand what's happening right now and as well as see things coming. Again, the multiple scenarios that you present is really powerful and I think can really help a lot of people understand what's going on with higher education.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both for the kind words, but also just a round of applause to Wesson and Brent for being great hosts. Look at this. I mean, you two need your own program. We'll do this, maybe shift the time zone a little bit, Brent. So, a bit more to the east, maybe Greenwich Mean Time. But thank you both. You are naturals at this. You are so good. Thank you for the questions. Thank you everybody for the questions. The next 2 weeks, the Future Transform will fall on Christmas and New Year's. So we've skipped that. Even the hardcore supporters don't want to do that. So we'll see you in January. And we have a series of great sessions. Go to the forum website, you can sign up. Thank you everybody for your attention, which is, I think, the best gift you can give anybody in the 21st century. Thank you for the questions and the comments. I'd love to hear more as you get to read the book, but thank you so much. I'll stick around here for a couple minutes after we end the session, but again, thanks to our hosts, thanks to all of you, and again, thanks to Greg Britton and Johns Hopkins University Press for doing the heroic work of bringing this book into the world. And for everybody else, please stay warm and dry wherever you are, and take care, be safe, and we'll see you next year. Bye-bye.
Hey, Carol.
Bye-bye.